Joining us now to discuss what we can expect for tonight's first Republican primary debate is the former Wisconsin governor and former presidential candidate himself, also the president of Young America's Foundation, Scott Walker. Governor, thanks for taking the time.
Hey, my pleasure. Great to be with you.
Thanks so much. So I do want to start out with something that many people are expecting to kind of be looming over the debate tonight, and that is the absence of former President Trump. Obviously, it's fairly unprecedented where you have the front runner in a primary campaign not show up to the debate. Of course, the difference here is that he is ahead in fairly unprecedented numbers for a primary as well. But what are you expecting to change given that he is not there, and how much of the conversation are you expecting to be on some of those concrete policy discussions, as people like Asa Hutchinson have been arguing? He says he's excited about the fact that the conversation will be aimed at policy.
Well, I think it all depends on both the moderators and the candidates. What I mean by that is if Brett and Martha, there's no doubt they have to ask at least a couple questions about not only the president's absence, but about the indictments, any of those sorts of things. But I hope out of 120 minutes, I hope that takes up no more than maybe 10 to 12 minutes. And I'd love to see the rest of it be a debate about things that you and I and others hear from people all the time. I'll give you an example. Just over the weekend, when I filled up my Chevy Traverse at our Quick Trip here in Wisconsin, it was almost $4 a gallon. And for those of us in the Midwest, that's a lot of money. I think there's many voters out there would love to hear from these candidates as well as the president about what are we going to do going forward to counter that? What are we going to do about fentanyl reaching into Wisconsin and dealing with because of the border crisis? What are we going to do about public safety problems in places like San Francisco and LA and New York and others? There's a lot of questions to be asked. So my hope is, as much as I think the president had a great track record, I think he makes a compelling case to be able to be the president again and build off of that. But I also want to hear from these other candidates, and I think most voters do. Give us your best shot. Tell us why you would be better than sending Donald Trump back to the White House.
And what about those candidates who have not qualified for the debate? Of course, you have people, specifically, I want to ask you about Larry Elder and Perry Johnson, two people who say that they are essentially suing the RNC over, they're saying that they've met the requirements. The RNC says that they have not met the requirements. Do you think, as of right now, the slate of candidates that will be on that debate stage is a fair number? Or do you think it's time to perhaps have a conversation about having more candidates on that stage?
Well, on one hand, I've always been, and I was in my own races, I'm fine with having as many candidates out there as want to be on the platform, give the voters a say. But I think over time, not only for those two you mentioned, but even for some of the candidates that just barely qualify, if they don't have breakthrough moments tonight, I think there's going to be a lot of voters after at least the first or second debate are going to say, hey, what are you doing giving people who've got 1 or 2% in the polls time when you're taking away from time from really hearing from maybe the top 4 or 5 candidates? That may change dramatically after tonight, but I think they should at least have their shot at the first debate. And then if you don't build any traction, I essentially did that 8 years ago. I was in the first 2 debates. I made the mistake of listening to consultants who told me just to run on my record instead of actually being as bold in my campaign for president as I was in my prior campaigns, both for governor of Wisconsin and for the Milwaukee County executive. I think that's a lesson learned to them. After a couple of debates, I realized that it was really boiling down to Donald Trump and maybe 1 or 2 alternatives, and I got out. The others did not do the same. But my hope is here after tonight, if these candidates don't have breakthrough moments, if they don't move the polls, it's probably time to narrow the field.
And what are you expecting in terms of kind of the back and forth between some of the different candidates? There was a memo that was put out by the DeSantis super PAC, Never Back Down, which was essentially calling on DeSantis to defend former President Trump if someone like Chris Christie made an attack against him. It called on DeSantis to take a sledgehammer, as was described, to Ramaswamy. What are you expecting between all of the candidates, and are you nervous to any degree that debates like this or party primaries perhaps alienate some of the Republican base because it can create a more divisive atmosphere?
I think as long as people have passion, if people are fighting, fighting's okay if they're fighting for you. If people come out and they're worked up about something, if they're defending something, if they're making a case and it's about something that matters to voters, that's great. If they're just taking cheap pot shots, I don't think people care much for that. My guess is tonight, Governor Chris Christie is going to come out and not only continues attacks on President Trump, but I think he probably is going to go after Governor Ron DeSantis. If he thinks he's got any chance He needs to shake things up. Certainly, that's going to be his moment. I don't see him getting a lot more traction than what he currently has, but I do think if Governor DeSantis is on his game and has one of those breakthrough moments, it could come by reacting to Chris Christie, by not just a matter of defending the president. I actually think most Republicans, the vast majority, whether they're behind Donald Trump for re-election or not, have had it with these indictments. They think they're politically motivated. They question the timing. It's like having a member of your family, even if it's not your favorite member. If you're attacking a member of my family, I'm going to defend them. And I think that's where most Republicans are. So anyone who's trashing the president, particularly in light of the indictments, I think is really kind of on the outer edge of where most Republicans are at. Having said that, I do think, though, if Chris Christie starts trashing some of the policies of DeSantis, I'd like to see him react and be pumped up and motivated. I think most voters want to see that kind of passion, not only to defend his policies or defend himself and his family, but do so in a way that makes voters know, hey, this guy's going to fight for me. If we have those kind of moments, I think you might see some traction.
And you mentioned some of the Trump indictments. Obviously, he's expected to appear in Georgia on Thursday. That's tomorrow. He's going to be launching a counter-programming initiative tonight in the form of an interview with former Fox anchor Tucker Carlson. You ran for president yourself. What is your advice to some of these candidates who are running against Donald Trump, who currently have, 1, 2, or even just 3% in the polls, in terms of being able to overcome someone like former President Donald Trump, who is receiving, as I said in the beginning, such high numbers in these polls?
Well, I think it's really tough if you're at 1 or 2%. I think, not only Governor DeSantis, I think if you look, it's probably field wise, you're probably looking at Vivek, you're probably looking at people like Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, probably, Tim Scott. Those are folks who are at least a known enough commodity. People know who they are, even if they don't know them well. For each of them, though, they've got to have a breakthrough moment tonight. They've got to sustain it through the next debate next month in September in California, and they have to build off of it. If they have a dud of a night, it may very well be over. So this is how critical these sorts of debates are going forward. And you got to figure out some way, make a splash, come out and counter someone like Chris Christie, make a pushback. Maybe it's something like announcing a big, bold idea, although most of those have already been started to lay out on the table. But somehow they're going to have a breakthrough moment.
All right, we'll leave it there. That's the former Wisconsin governor, president of Young America's Foundation, Scott Walker. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.